Connie Gunzenhauser, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm really happy to have you all here today. I see nobody took the brown bag part of this very seriously, but if you did, feel free to start eating your lunch. Good job, Margie. There are cookies and beverages in the back. Feel free to help yourself. One other set of ground rules. We're in the middle of a class period here, since after all, we are a university, so I know some people are probably going to join us a little late. Some people are going to leave a little early to go to their class. Please do not be offended. That's just how things go. But this is definitely going to be a lively discussion about last week's election and its implications for our collective future. And I want to note that the discussion today is happening under the umbrella of Roosevelt's ongoing American Dream Reconsidered project. As a lot of you already know, Roosevelt was founded in 1945 to protest discriminatory racial and religious college admission quotas. And the university remains dedicated to providing access to higher education for all qualified students. So in keeping with that heritage, we're constantly renewing our commitment to understand our national ethos of democracy and equality. And the American Dream Reconsidered lecture series is one way that we gather as a university to reflect on what it means to be an American in our contemporary times. So today I would like to welcome and thank Professor Ralph Martire and Cook County Clerk David Orr for their participation in this event. I want to just introduce each of them briefly, and then we'll get down to the reason that you're all here. First, David Orr. As Cook County Clerk, he has served as the chief election authority in the third largest election jurisdiction in the country. Has a distinguished history of providing electoral leadership and innovation, including promoting the passage of a statewide law that allows junior and senior high school students to serve as election judges. That's part of the Teen Democracy program. Drafting legislation to merge off-year school board and municipal elections that has resulted in a statewide savings of $7.5 million every other year. And providing expertise internationally, delivering lectures regarding election-related matters and community organizing, serving as an election monitor in places such as Macedonia and Bangladesh. Before embarking on his career in public service, he was assistant professor of history and urban affairs at Mundelein College in Chicago, continues to teach, currently as a senior fellow in the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy, and soon as distinguished faculty in Roosevelt's own Masters of Public Administration program. So welcome, David Orr. And joining in conversation with David Orr, we have Ralph Martire, who is the Arthur Rubloff Endowed Professor of Public Policy at Roosevelt and the Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, which is a think tank committed to ensuring that state, federal, and local workforce, education, fiscal, economic, and budget policies are fair and just, and to promoting opportunity for all regardless of race, ethnicity, or income class. Professor Martire has been a member of the Equity and Excellence Administration as part of an education commission established by Congress during the Obama administration. And just last week, Governor-elect J.B. Pritzker appointed him to his newly formed Budget and Innovation Committee. At Roosevelt, Professor Martire teaches courses that cover various aspects of public policy generally and fiscal and education policy specifically. So thank you. And now on with our show.
Well, David, I'm thrilled you're here, and I'm very loud. Can you all hear that? Echo, echo, echo. You've had a real interesting history here in Chicago. You've been an alderman, you've been a mayor. In fact, you might be the only qualified guy who's not running for mayor right now in the 17 candidates announced. But you've had 40 years in Chicago politics. In that amount of time, any interesting stories come to mind before we jump into the election that you'd like to chat about?
Well, as an old politician, I have plenty of stories, but yeah, I want to tell one. But first, thanks to you, Ralph. He does a great service. He's not elected, but he does a great service. And looking forward to working with you all at Roosevelt here. So I like this story. This goes back to the 80s when I was in the city council. And I was one of the so-called independents. And so the story is whenever we'd speak, there'd be some of the old regulars, a guy named Fred Rohde, who I can now tell this story because he's dead. Fred was a mobster and the famous First Ward alderman, which was convenient for most of the aldermen because they didn't have to pay attention, and Fred was number one, so the way Fred voted, you knew how to vote if you were part of the machine, which most people were. And he went to jail for mobster activity, and so I can tell the story. So on this particular day, the city council meeting come up, I was having a conversation with Fred. We weren't bosom buddies, but a conversation that morning, I discovered that his wife's maiden name was the same as mine, Orr. I don't know how it came up. So later in the meeting, when I was speaking, and I was saying how the regular types, Mel and Burke and Rhodey, they all get in a corner and make a lot of noise, hopefully to attract the press from what you're saying. Just kind of a gimmick that sounds pretty disgusting, but what those of us in politics are used to. So I paused in the middle of whatever I was saying. I said, and point over toward the gang, and I said, well, you can see, even though Fred's wife is married to an Orr, hasn't done me any good. Thought nothing of it, sat down, and immediately, about 25, 30 press run from their haunch over here, which is quite a ways from my desk, run to my desk, shoved a bunch of microphones in my face and said, did you just call Fred's wife a whore? So, and I was a little nervous about that, but so all day long I kept getting those notes. Hey, Orr, the cement truck's out front for you. So anyway, lots of entertaining things behind the scenes.
Well, Chicago history could probably take up the whole conversation, but there's something more recently that happened, an election, that set some records, and it's going to change some things at the state, local level, and in the U.S. I mean, no matter how you look at it. So I'd like to have your first takes on that, David.
Well, there's several records that are just suburban cook. And remember, don't worry about our slides. We have a few. They may fit, they may not, but if they work, fine. Some important records, though, here, again, for suburban cook. And let me make that clear here, that I'm clerk for the whole county, but when it comes to elections, I only do suburban cook, okay? It's important because the city has a lot more problems than I do, and I always get blamed for all their problems. So just want you to know that. So first record, early voting, which of course is dear to my heart because we work hard to bring it here because what right-minded republic votes on a work day? But we're one of, two major ones in the world that does. So you can see from those numbers roughly just dramatic changes in early voting. The second big record was on mail. As you know, we passed legislation to allow everyone vote for mail not too long ago for the same reason, that since we do vote on a work day, let's make it as easy as possible. Those are pretty stunning increases. Now, part of the mail is determined by how aggressive the candidates are. And in this case, one candidate, Mr. Pritzker, sent out an enormous number of applications, which of course is legal, which probably had a lot to do with it. And there'll be a lot of talk in the future about doing more voting by mail. The other record was, is that the voter registration one? That's turnout. Wasn't necessarily a record, but in recent times, that's really important because unfortunately, in local elections and even gubernatorial elections, we as a people don't vary and vote in high numbers, which is why we end up with so many duds and bad public policy. So you can see that's a pretty dramatic difference. And that it kind of, these turnout numbers explain everything that's going on in the nation. Okay, I mean, it's not so a question of are more people Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. It's really a question of who votes. And that dynamically changed everything this time. The fourth record, which I forgot, we didn't put a slide up, is basically voter registration in suburban cook. So we're at the highest number ever. Okay, Chicago gradually surpassed Chicago over the years. That's something else, but that's more for the future questions. Yes. So anyway, a lot of records.
A lot of records, including pretty high voter turnout.
Turnout was very significant for us. Again, I think it's good to look at those numbers. Go from 690-some thousand to 780,000. And where those numbers came from. I mean, we have a kind of a slide coming up there someplace. But if you ask kind of what really made the difference in the turnout, I don't know if that's one of the questions.
Go there, but can I hand you these? And then
we're just jumping around anyway. But several factors in terms of turnout. One, women. I mean, women not only voted in great numbers, but we talk about the year of the woman, but you saw the women candidates, okay? Trump, obviously, the single biggest factor, both for and against him. All the exit polls showed that that had a great deal to do with the election. I put indivisible, but there's so many organizations out there doing things, which all affects turnout. And is that a picture of Mr. Michael Madigan? Okay, all of you Madigan haters, the bottom line is Madigan's work to have races, particularly in the northern parts of Cook County, had a lot to do with the big Democratic surge. And it helped, in other words, obviously they were trying to elect people like Caston in the 6th for Congress and Underwood and so forth. But in Cook County, suburban Cook, there was far more races there. And then they could work together. So the people working for Caston could work for that. The people worked for the state rep, the state senate. So it was a major factor in the turnout. And despite all of what Mr. Rauner has said, Madigan still has power, even if he's not terribly popular. But that was a big factor. It wasn't the same in some of the southern parts of Cook County. For example, my deputy chief of staff ran for county commissioner, and he was about the only Democrat that lost in a razor-thin margin. The others won. The chairman of the state Republican Party county commissioner lost. Another county commissioner named Goslin lost. Okay, but in this case, Abdel Nasser Rashid, who out of principle kept his name very clearly. He didn't do like Raja did, which I thought was wonderful. Raja did when he ran for Congress because no one could pronounce his name, but he used the nickname. Nas didn't. He razor-thin lost, but there weren't those. If those same races were taking place in his district, where state reps and state senators were competing, he probably would have won that too.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You mentioned that he lost in a razor-thin election, but if you look at the national level and you look at Congress, this freshman class of congressmen is going to be unique. It will be the most diverse and the most female freshman class in history. We have at least 4 openly LGBT candidates that got elected. The first ever woman Muslim, actually 2, were elected to Congress. First ever woman Native American, actually 2, and one of whom is openly gay, elected to Congress. So we see this growing diversity in the House of Representatives. We don't quite see that in the Senate. In fact, the Republicans gained seats in the Senate. What's your take on that, David? How do you feel that? Why do you think that happened, and what do you think that means for policy initiatives going forward at the federal level?
Well, first, I'm glad you asked, because that's a bone I have to pick with, of course, our democracy. Those are just some other numbers that we're all interested in. First, related to that, I see this as a dramatic blue victory, okay? I know some of the national news, I don't mean Fox News, said, well, kind of divided victory. No, it wasn't divided victory. It was an overwhelmingly smashing victory for Democrats, okay? Not that I like all the Democrats. The Senate's a different beast, and there's a good article in the New York Times, I think it's today, about that. Remember, first of all, the Senate is not Democratic at all. And you can say, well, that's just the way it is. But, you know, if you believe the Senate should still stay 2 votes per person, so 670,000 voters in Idaho have the same power as the 40 million in California, okay, then you probably want to go back to where we had a slave was 3/4 of a vote. It's really, really important that we recognize you can't be a democratic nation and brag about it around the country when your most important institution in terms of representing the people is not democratic at all. So that's number one, keep that in mind. And secondly, it may be a pickup of only 2. Most of you know this. The Democrats had a lot more seats to compete for this time. The problem the Republicans will have, they'll have a lot of seats up in 2020. So I don't see it, I don't see the other side there, any kind of a smashing victory. Because we need to look at, if, for example, this country was governed by a true democracy, or at least a representative form of government, I haven't done the math, but maybe you'd have, based on this last turnout, 65 Democratic senators. And I don't say that because I want to have all these Democrats. What you want is a system that responds to the public. So I'm just going on for a second. But responding to the public means if you're a weak party, for whatever reasons, you got to change your policies. That's why we had third parties that kind of disappeared, or you change your position on slavery, okay? But if you're allowed to be a party that appears to be a minority party, but through voter suppression and all sorts of other things can maintain power, including the U.S. Senate, that's not a good sign of democracy. Okay, so the key is, in my mind, is letting the voters have their say, which they did, but having a U.S. Senate dominated by Republicans makes no sense when you look at the vote. So that's my beef on the Electoral College and the U.S. Senate. And we got a lot of young people here. There's no way we settle for that. I know it's a constitutional amendment, but why should you be governed the rest of your lives in an anti-democratic, situation?
And I think when you look at the numbers, I mean, it's a lot like Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign against Donald Trump, right? Where she won the popular vote and lost the Electoral College. And you see this demographic division now in the United States between an increasingly diverse and somewhat progressive urban to suburban areas versus more sparsely populated, primarily white, primarily small town or rural, and primarily conservative areas. And you see this tension playing out in the Senate. You see it in some very divisive politics. What's it going to mean for public policy?
Well, the federal level? Start there?
Yeah, start there.
Well, remember, the challenge in looking at the federal level is obviously there's differences both between the Democrats, Republicans, but also we got to understand in the Republican Party, remember, we shouldn't call them conservative. The Republican Party has changed. And that word conservative is misleading because to a great extent it's a right-wing party now. Not to take away from good Republicans or whatever, but that's changed. So what you're going to have, each of those parties, the battle within them, okay? Most people would look at this as a, quote, victory for progressives, if you look at the kind of people who got elected, et cetera. But the more moderate Democrats will debate that. So there'll be the battle within the Democrats, and then what are they going to come up with? And they'll obviously be pushing all sorts of issues, equity pay for women, things on the economy, minimum wage, the infrastructure, all sorts of things that are kind of bread and butter issues that traditional Democrats would support. Some of those Trump has given some lip service to, and maybe he may be serious toward those. The Republicans, do they continue as kind of a right-wing party, or do they moderate some as they approach 2020? Are the tax breaks that they thought would be of great success to them in this election, which didn't turn out to be, are they going to moderate that, particularly as more and more people see those really are not many tax breaks for average people as it gets worse each year as we go down the cycle. So the challenge, will they moderate? But the key to all that sometimes, like when Harold Washington was mayor and the battles we fought, had sometimes less to do with policy and mostly about the racial political battle going on. So the battle for Trump's survival, not just Mueller, but all the possible indictments coming that nearly everybody he knows is in jail or ought to be in jail. Now, whether or not he can escape all that, but the fact is that will be the context in which a lot of this is fought out. And you see all this. That's why many of the Democrats are trying to be careful about kind of investigations they're going to do because they don't want to look like they're just after Trump personally. So what it means for public policy basically is on the things that I think carry a lot of people, like let's say the infrastructure, maybe they can cut a deal. The problem, it comes down to kind of moderate versus liberal, whatever you want to call it. If Trump insists that the only infrastructure program he will go for is the privatization of it, which is what Republicans were pushing, versus public expenditures that have public controls, that'll be more of a battle. So there is opportunity for compromise. It depends on how many Republicans, frankly, get scared as we get closer to 2020 that they'll all go down.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the election also was local here, and for those of you who don't know, you talked about Mayor Washington. You were deputy mayor under Harold Washington, weren't you?
Well, I was what they called vice mayor.
Vice mayor.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's been literally at the helm working on trying to change things. And so this election is going to impact things here in Illinois too at the state and local level, I would imagine, from a policy standpoint, because it was a significant blue wave here.
Well, I think so. Again, same kind of situation if we look at the state first, and Ralph will have a lot to do with that, being on Pritzker's advisory board. We had a similar situation, divisions within the parties, and now the Republicans really have to figure out what they're going to do in Illinois, okay? A lot of them reluctantly went the Trump way, others didn't, and so that battle will be fought out. On the Democratic side, I think a lot of the so-called progressives believe that was a big victory for them on issues that we believe people care about. So the key will be is what does Pritzker do with it? I was glad that he talked about the fair income tax or progressive income tax as a way of bringing in revenue in a fairer way to the state. He did seem to moderate that a little bit the last couple of days. But that's really the big stuff, is how do we pay for all these expenses federally, statewide. I think his moves recently are showing that he's going to seek bipartisanship, like most traditional Republican governors have, the Ryans and the Edgars and so forth. Whether or not that works, it may work because Republicans are worried about survival, and if they continue in Rauner's direction, I don't think they will at least be able to survive in the numbers they want. So I do think there'll be some compromises, but it's a chance, I think, for then the more liberal Democrats to keep pushing their agenda on various things we can talk about if you want, and the moderate Democrats to be a little bit of a check on that, and we'll see who wins out. At the city, I think it's a great time. I'm leaving, okay? And 3 weeks from now, I'll be sitting at home reading my paper all day and playing Sudoku. But you young people, it's a great time, I think, to be in politics. Now, of course, there's a bad side, all the nasty things that are said about you. But I really think that there's a great chance for some really good aldermen. And that's one of the things I'm going to try and do is encourage that. In other words, not so much mealy mouth. This is a chance to talk big, ask big, take very seriously about how we change things. Because no matter who the mayor is, and we really don't know, I do think there's a chance to have more truly independent-minded aldermen setting agendas. And there's so many things, like if I had my magic wand, I would say don't vote for any budget, even if there's less taxes in it this year, unless you fix things. You know, the workman's comp is a disgrace, and one person should not be allowed to handle that, Mr. Burke. And even to say the Inspector General can't even look at that. We all know that's a mess. And I could go on and on with all the scandals and misuse of money, okay, they're going on, that I hope aggressive campaigns, and there'll be a lot of them, raise those issues. Just one good example, recycling. You know, in the news a little while ago, if you didn't see it, but only in Chicago do we have a private hauler, okay, good old waste management, a private hauler that is being alleged, with a lot of evidence behind it from the Inspector General and others, they take in all this money, and you might have read, I mean, they're supposed to help with the recycling, right? And then take in all of this waste, but they say it's contaminated. In some cases it is a little bit. Well, it's contaminated, so they get paid to do that, and then they get paid to take it to their dump and then sell it. Okay, so large amounts of money are being lost on these secretive and private deals that good aldermen could blow out of the water. So I just think it's a great time, and there's a possibility of more democracy in the city council than we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges that are going to emerge. I mean, Speaker Madigan suddenly became a progressive Democrat the last couple of years. And I remember years and years working at the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, where the speaker was something other than the most progressive Democrat in the state. Now that the state has gone to a supermajority in the House for the Democrats and a supermajority in the Senate, which they've had for a while, we'll have a Democratic governor. It'll be interesting to see if the speaker stays very progressive. Chances are he may not, and that could really impact a lot of these initiatives that move forward, especially since the Republicans that are in office have gone far more to the right, and most of the sort of the middle of the road or moderate Republicans have retired. They've left. And the speaker frequently looks for bipartisan support on controversial things like changing the tax code to go to a graduated rate. So, I mean, that'll be, you highlighted it. I think that's a really important thing to watch happen. And maybe if people are progressives and they want to pursue a progressive agenda, at least in this state, I think focusing some of your lobbying efforts on the Speaker's office and on the targets would probably be beneficial. Huh?
Absolutely. And let me just explain this slide. I mean, we had a little fun with this just so that part of this is yes, there is a move for, I believe, what people call progressive, even though people don't define it the same way. But for fun, we put that. What's interesting now, all the gubernatorial candidates, at least on the Democrat side, ran as progressives, even Pritzker, okay? And all the mayoral candidates, almost all, are running as progressives, and all the ones that see themselves as the major candidates, including the famous Daley name. So, I mean, I do that with a little tongue in cheek, because I think there's only 2 progressives on those pictures, but and you can decide what you think about that. But yes, in other words, Madigan is but of a genius with power, and those of us that consider ourselves more progressive than him will be doing what we can to pressure those legislators. And remember, because he's got that supermajority, doesn't mean people will not buck it. Okay, I think you will see more independence in the state legislature than you've seen, but you'll also, the question is, which way does Pritzker go? Now, of course, Quinn, that was different, and there's all sorts of reasons why perhaps Madigan didn't want Quinn to be around, or maybe his daughter was going to take Quinn's place. But if there is more cooperation, we don't usually see it, but if there is more cooperation between the Democratic governor and the speaker, there could be some significant things that happen. But Ralph's point was really important, that when you have a majority, okay, you want the other side to join you on the controversial things, like budget things. Now, the city council, that's never mattered too much, because they always had roughly 45 votes in their pocket on anything. But it's still something that when you don't, you want to have. So I do think it's a time when Republicans, like I say, will be shifting to try and figure out what their strategy is. But Democrats will have that classic battle we always do between those who consider themselves more progressive and those more moderate, particularly around the financial issues. So it's a great opportunity to push for good things now.
Well, we're going to skip down to sort of the mayoral race itself. There's going to be some big issues facing the incoming mayor. We have literally 17 people have announced their candidacy for mayor. I don't live in the city, but I'm thinking about announcing just for the heck of it. Why not? And there's going to be a lot of issues that they're going to have to deal with that are very real. Within 4 years, their pension payment has to go up by $1 billion. $1 billion. City doesn't have that lying around in its coffers, any place that I could see. You have significant high violent crime rates and murder rates, and very low murder solving rates with the police department. That is going to implicate, I think, a natural tension for the incoming mayor between public safety and civil rights. You're going to see some major challenges for this person there. CPS is its own unique situation. It has its own pension problem. It's had some issues with safety of the children. It's had some issues with everything from academic performance to outsourcing contracts, let's say, weren't exactly legitimate. So what are the biggest challenges facing the incoming mayor, and where do you think the biggest opportunities are to move forward?
Well, I think the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities are, in my mind, that the 2 central issues of the city 30, 40 years ago and today: racism, you can add the intolerance, but racism and inequality. You know, trying to do this in a simple way, you know, my historical attack on the Democratic machine, okay, or where there's a Republican machine too, is the damage it does to the body politic. Let me just real quick, and then go right back to that if you ask yourself, why does Chicago seem to have more problems than New York and LA, and from my vantage point they do, when it comes to racism, police, lack of accountability, affordable housing, schools, just kind of go on and on. And I would suggest, and you can counter my views, of course, I would suggest the Democratic machine and its corruption, its misuse of money, its favoritism for the few, which led to so many things, including the kind of police force we have, that people often don't realize. You know, Ed Burke and Ed Verdoliak had a lot to do with who were Chicago police today, and a lot to do with promoting those Chicago police, okay? And there's so many things because of the racism, which was essential for Old Man Daley in the way he ran the city. Extraordinarily racism, okay? And police were taught, your job is to make sure those African Americans, didn't always use those words, don't leave those neighborhoods, okay? And if you find them up in the Northwest Side, you stop and arrest them. And that was policy. And then all the other things, if you study this period, which is very important, extraordinary damage to the body politic. So we're suffering from that. So what I'm suggesting is everything we do, including dealing with financial issues, which we're still not doing as we speak today, has to deal with the inequality. Okay, every day Chicago brags about, I don't know whether $5 billion project up along the river, okay, and it sounds like potentially $2 billion of public funds. You know, we're going to fix up the theater, today's paper up in Uptown. All these things with public funds, okay? Now, again, if we had a fair situation to begin with, we didn't have massive poverty among blacks and some Hispanics in Chicago, and we had enclosed mental health centers and all the other things you know, then economic development helps maybe a smaller group, has benefits, like the whole TIF financing, the tax increment financing. Literally, the vast majority of it has gone for the rich and powerful. So if we don't deal with these things, I don't know, because the crime problem is not so much police, it's partly police, but what do you expect when you have the serious kind of racism and lack of opportunity and so forth? So there is an opportunity to do things there. Now, Rahm, to his credit, toward the end of his thing, is trying to do a number of things. You know, he's using TIF money properly, still not properly, but he's using it smarter than Daley, okay, meaning he understands he can't give it all to the private corporations, and if we did a 30-minute walk, we could point to almost every building around here and the TIF money they've gotten in this horribly depressed neighborhood. But Rahm is a little smarter than that, and he's using the money for public things, which is not necessarily what the TIF was for, but for schools and parks and where he can't get enough money for capital to do the transportation things. So there is a great opportunity if you deal seriously with those issues, but it means to be successful, you got to find a way to get money without continuing to milk average taxpayers. And that has been the mantra of the past two mayors, okay? And but to do that, you got to spend money more wisely, and you've got to say you've already said it to the workers, and you've said it to the citizens, you have to sacrifice. The question is, when is a mayor going to say to everybody else, the ones that have the power and the money and the major corporations that benefit so much, when are they going to say, you have to pay too? Okay? So, I mean, I think there's an opportunity a mayor comes in and says, okay, Chapman and Cutler, all the various law firms, all of you folks that make an enormous amount of money from the public money, okay? We can't pay you $450 an hour. We're going to pay you $350 an hour. Okay, this contract you want to do this little thing, you want $64 million, we're only going to give you $52 million. If we had that kind of serious stuff, it'd start mounting up. So one, you got to be serious about the money. You got to put money into some of these neighborhoods. Now the good news is Pritzker, I do believe as governor, will help unleash some money to Chicago, which needs it. But so, I mean, there's all sorts of other things. Obviously, the police accountability, the schools, but those are the biggies. The blatant racism and the inequality has done disservice. And again, we're all proud of Millennium Park. We're proud of the downtown. We're proud of the Riverwalk. But as long as we say most of our money and energy, if not our PR, is going toward helping this enormous expansion of the wealthy up and down the river and so forth, Chicago as a whole will not gain, but some will gain a great deal.
You've done a great job, highlighting some of the problems that came along with the machine that aren't just pure political problems that go across racial lines and income lines, and I think that's really important to highlight. It is so hard to see these things that become structurally racist as they go on and continue over time. So what's changed? Have you seen anything positive that's developed?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of good things happening over the last few years, but particularly this election kind of indicates that. When I said before, if you're thinking of running for alderman, I think it's a good time. I have a basic view, and I'm sure you've got some people that are good with data out here, but I do believe it's fairly clear what the citizens want. They just haven't got it. They haven't had the power to get it. So when people vote at greater numbers, there is appreciation for diversity here. There is a desire for better spending of money. There's a smaller group of progressive aldermen that talk about these things, reform the TIF money, use the surpluses much more than they've been doing. There's a lot of money, frankly, that could be turned around. It's not all just from the heavy taxing, okay? So I think at every front, but again, you have to get away with this notion of you hire those people that you can trust and never say anything bad about you, which includes too many crooks and too many people that embarrass you, okay? There's way too much of this stuff. You work in City Hall, you get in trouble, they send you to work in the county. If you get in trouble there, we send you to the Forest Preserve. I mean, I fired somebody a few years ago for stealing, and a few weeks later, he popped up on the Forest Preserve District, okay? Now, I remember, I'm old school, I'm not accusing everyone of being a crook, and things have gotten better. There are changes, a lot of it because of the activist groups. When people go out, like this last election, and they work hard, the individuals, all the other groups, okay, they are really charged now. They are really excited. Now, that could be a tremendous advantage for better public policy in the future if, in fact, those people in government respond. If they don't, we'll see a massive shift of frustration and anger, okay? So what we do, we have an opportunity to do really good things because people have given us that opportunity. So I see it everywhere, not just in election scene, I see it with all these issues. There are people, I mean, good people in Chicago fighting upstream on every issue you can think of. The schools, they don't get in the paper every day. The environment, obviously the policing, which is outside of the race and inequality is probably the most important thing to try and get it right. And with Trump's messing with it and that fool Sessions, who's no longer our Attorney General, I mean, the bottom line is it's going to be really difficult to get a good police accountability out of this, but it hopefully will be better than before. So I see a lot of good things, even though I get pretty angry at what I see, the remnants of the old machine.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, old precinct captains don't die. They just go on to become ghost payrollers and ghost voters. So you frequently, David, have complained about vitality in democracy, and you've either noted that we have it or we don't. You're worried about its future. You spent an entire career trying to make voting more accessible to more people. So what about this election, if anything, suggests that we actually have a more vital democracy or maybe a less vital one? What did you see?
Well, like so many things, and you all know this. I mean, we see the good and the bad. We see the bad, the enormous attempts at voter suppression, which I think is much more serious than most people understand. And I believe, along with that, the money. The money in politics is absolutely devastating. And no offense, as I've said, like to JB or to Rauner, if you allow billionaires to be able to run, in other words, I don't mind you being a billionaire. What I resent is now we have permanent elections. Now we have elections that go on for months after months. You can't run for office if you're not extraordinarily wealthy in many cases, or getting money from extraordinarily wealthy people. In many cases, they want to pay back. Okay, so the money in politics is extremely dangerous, along with the voter suppression. But what trumps that? Sorry for the word, and that is, in this case, voter turnout. You know, in some ways, it's so simple. It's stuff that we learn in Government 101. But like we said earlier, if people, in other words, average people, they don't have much left, okay? They don't have that kind of money. They don't have many leaders that really pay attention to them. But this time, when that number, close to 200,000 in suburban Cook, and all these various counties, okay, and I don't want to measure just in terms of Democrat and Republican, but if you try and measure that with the issues that seem to be supported by a majority of American people, those are the things that won out. So that all, it doesn't necessarily trump these wicked things, but it really does help us to see a path. And there are good ideas that people have around the country to deal with voter suppression and to deal with the money. But when you can get more support among voters, then you have a better chance of passing them. I mean, for example, dark money is killing us, okay, even though some of the dark money may have helped some people we like. California's got some really good ideas. You know, there's small donor matching. There's all sorts of things that could be done. But to a great extent, the Democrats have been a little nervous to go there. The Republicans don't want to go there. With this last election, there's a chance for moving in those directions.
Well, we're different here in Illinois on voter suppression. I'm going to want to get you into that for a second, but just to talk about what's going on in the rest of the country, right? We had North Carolina and Arkansas pass laws to make it harder for people to register to vote, intentionally trying to disenfranchise low-income populations, generally black and brown populations specifically. I mean, that was the goal. Then you see Florida, normally a state that represses voter turnout, allow now 1.4 convicted felons to get their vote back. A very progressive change.
But here's the key, because just the way you said that, Florida's a state doesn't do this. It's the leadership. And the same in North Carolina and other places. See what I mean? The public is okay on almost all these things. They don't want all this suppression. Florida leadership does, okay? But that issue on the felony is so important. And if you don't know the history, you should, because when I talk about racism and inequality, knowing the history is so important. That there's this idea that up to 1.4 million people haven't been able to vote the rest of their lives in Florida. There would have been no 2000 election. There would have been no Bush in 2000 had there not been hundreds of thousands of African Americans that couldn't vote. For what? Oh, these bad felonies. You know what all these felonies were? Spitting on the sidewalk. Okay, if you study the history, and it's important that we do that, okay, when there's this major threat, at least powerful whites thought in the South, late 18 into 1890s, they passed these laws. And they're very, if you read it, they're very open about it. We got to make a way, make sure that these blacks can't vote. So let's have a lot of felonies that are very small. Arrest them once, they'll get a felony. They'll get out, but they can never vote the rest of their lives. That was all intentional policy that has been followed up over and over by these states. Now, I can't say what happened in Virginia a couple years ago necessarily, but remember, Virginia elected, almost totally switched their state house from Democrat to Republican, which led toward, when I talk about, forget the party, but most of us would agree that Medicaid for all is a good thing. So now because of that political switch, whether you're Democrat or Republican, it allowed 400,000 people in Virginia to now get medical assistance they never had before, 400,000 poor people. But the governor of Virginia had to fight with the legislature to allow tens of thousands of mostly African Americans, the same thing, we're felons pretty much for life. And there was an ugly, ugly battle, but he finally won that out. And thousands of people were eligible to vote. So the public is in the right position. And if we have more of a democracy, then leaders will follow. Leaders can only do these things when there's an old machine or they have unchecked power.
How's Illinois different? What have we done to sort of stem that tide and be a leader on allowing voter access? Oh,
we kind of talk. This is our brag sheet. I mean, I think we have done a lot in Illinois, and there's been wonderful groups. We got a slide in there, and hopefully you're part of some of them, the Common Cause of the World, the ACLUs. But we've really been lucky, and I have to say this, and I'm certainly I would not be considered to be invited to the table with Mike Madigan, but a lot of these things that I'm talking about here would not have been possible without Mike Madigan, John Cullerton's support. Okay, well, the big motor voter was really important, and if you don't know the history, motor voter was a national law which dramatically made it easier to register. Okay, but in Illinois, in this case, Edgar refused to sign it, so we had to sue him. And when the federal court said, Mr. Edgar, you got to obey the law, I said, okay, well, I'll obey the law, but I'll up you one. I'll make it two-tier, which means, yeah, if you register through motor voter, this new federal law that Clinton pushed, fine, you're registered to vote for president. But you have to register separately if you want to vote for governor. Okay, well, I sued him again, and he lost, but those are major battles. And then with the help of all these groups, and maybe some of you in the room, motor voter, early voting I mentioned, which I think is really important, voting by mail, the teen judge, online registration, which now is the best way for people to register in the world. Young people just grabbing their phones. And so there's a lot there. There's still a lot that we need to do. But there's a lot of things which have, I think, made Illinois better. By the way, we hope to have it ready by today. We didn't. We have a little analysis coming out called, how how Illinois became a voter-friendly state, okay? And I'm going to encourage any of you, because we didn't have it to give out today, but we will have it available on the website before long, and we'll have copies before long. When I say these things, I don't know, because I'm not going to be clerk, so when I say the website, I guess it'll have to be my own website. But
It'll be available on the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability's website. I'll guarantee that.
there's a lot of, I'm so spoiled. I don't know how I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to do after 40 years in public life.
Well, I know one thing you're going to do, right?
One thing, I'm looking forward to helping Ralph here at Roosevelt, and
David's going to join us as a distinguished fellow. And
I like to teach as long as it's not too much work. Sorry there for the faculty. I got a really great one though at University of Chicago, because I teach a thing called leadership, and there's no tests. It's something that students, it's an extra class they just take because they want to. And we bring in great speakers, and they love it because the rest of their time they're busy dealing with economics and data, whatever. So that's the kind of class I like. You know, it's hard. It's hard to teach otherwise.
It's too bad there aren't more students here, because you'd have just had a bunch of them signing up for your course, I think.
Well, that was there.
In droves. Gerrymandering's a big issue, right? We talk about the map that the Democrats ran against in red states, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting, constitutionally, one of the things that you can do when you draw a map is protect the interest of incumbents. That's actually constitutionally permissible. However, we know that Colorado, Missouri, Michigan just recently passed some laws that would limit gerrymandering. Do you have any feelings for what is possible in Illinois, or is that just dead on arrival, having a more balanced approach to the map?
Well, it may not be dead on arrival. I mean, the Democrats are, of course, pleased with their control, because Democrats rightly have a reason to fear when they see what's been done in some of the red states. You would, even before this election, you couldn't have a dramatic majority in Congress Republican when, in fact, those states that they came from voted Democrat. So that's a gerrymandering problem, okay? Illinois is a little different. So I do think there's a possibility, like I say, because Pritzker may, in fact, want to find some way to be a little bit bipartisan. Madigan might even be able to go along, because he may think he's still smart enough to win his majorities, even with a different map. The one thing about the maps, when we talk about fair mapping and all that, we always say, well, we don't want politicians drawing the line. We want independent. Well, there's no such thing as independent people. Somebody picks everybody. Now, hopefully, if you think the people you get in the independent group are better than some elected officials, good. Okay, step in the right direction. But the key is, when we play this game with redistricting, don't just think about the funny little lines on the maps, okay? Because some of those funny lines are for good reasons. Because of the blatant racism, discrimination, some of those boundaries are so we can get a majority African-American district or majority Latino district. You look at Luis Gutierrez's district that now Chuy Garcia will take over. Yeah, it's all over the place. But there are better ways to do it than what we do. So I'm hopeful. I think the bigger concern for me is, can we deal with the national level? Because that's what's so important. And it looks now with the courts, it looked like we had some progress a year or two ago, and now from what I'm seeing, I don't think the courts will be our friend at all on redistricting. So if you can't get help in making what should be legal, then you have to win these elections.
So you've made it a point that the Democrats aren't always the most progressive. We've had machine candidates from the Democratic side that may or may not have had the best interests of disenfranchised populations in their heart when they were pushing different policies that ended up reinforcing past vestiges of discrimination. We've seen that historically. Now we've got the Democrats in control in the House. But the Democrats really haven't put forth any kind of unifying vision, or a vision that would maybe inspire people of all backgrounds to be supportive of the Democratic Party. How can the Democrats really push a unifying vision that's more progressive, to get elected officials to be more progressive, to really put in place these policies, which, what's interesting about public policy, so I am the Rubloff professor here, if you look at the evidence-based policies and you look at what has statistically meaningful correlations to being successful, most of the time those tend to be policies we categorize, if we're going to put a label on them, as progressive. They also tend to be more evidence-based. Politically, we have a hard time getting them done. How do we move this forward? We have Democratic control of the House. We have Democratic control of the state here. What's missing?
Well, again, the most important lesson from this last election, and the lesson that we should always have out there, is voting is only one step. Voting is critical. But what I would often say to my students is, okay, you vote, you're so excited, you go home, you did your civic duty, you wear your little button, whatever, okay? And that should determine public policy. But you go home that night, the lobbyists and others come in the next day, and they determine the public policy regardless of the vote, okay? So it's freedom is not free. Freedom is not free. We got to pay for our freedom. We got to do something. So the other part, which relates to this battle between moderate Democrats, progressive Democrats, and wherever they could unite, is really a question of organization. Okay, it's a question of if the people who did all these exciting things around campaigns, if they stay active, we had that slide in there about hold the elected officials' feet to the fire. This is accountability. That's all we want. Okay, if I live in a traditional district and they say, we want a voter ID, we win, you lose, fine, but at least it was a fair fight, okay? But accountability is what above all we need, okay? But to get accountability, it takes this kind of action. One more story. The day before Harold Washington died, I had the longest one-on-one conversation with him, I think, in our entire time. It was probably well over an hour. And this was November of 1987. And we were talking about is, how do we move this quoted progressive agenda? And Harold is saying to me, David, you and you goddamn liberals, progressives, you got to understand, I can't do all this myself. There's too many chips in politics, okay? Whether my name is Obama or Washington or whatever it is, I can't do all this. You guys have to be doing your part. You've got to be at the whatever. Politicians are like anybody else. Some people will do, I'm a little different only because I was lucky, okay? Probably to digress one. I was lucky because after I was mayor for a week, I was undefeatable by the machine, frankly, okay? I never would have been elected anything except for that week as mayor because of name recognition, blah, blah, blah. And I'd like to think the things and fighting the battles I fought, I would have done anyway, but it's easier for me than other people who are worried they're going to be smashed at the next election, or you cross Mike Madigan, and all of a sudden your next opponent has $400,000 coming from someplace. So before I forget where we're going with this, that it's essential that if we want to move these agendas, this organization. So if all these groups out there, the indivisibles, the Leave One Voters, the traditional groups, the new groups, it's extraordinarily important. Politicians, a lot of them are fairly weak. They're followers, not leaders. Some are leaders, okay? And good ones will go further, maybe take more risk to be progressive on things that we might share values on, but others will move. That's why I had that little picture of all these people. Bill Daley's a progressive. You know what I mean? It's just everybody's progressive nowadays, at least in some of our area. But we can move them farther if there's that organization. So you have to be. So taking it back to your point, it's which group will influence the Democrats the most? Will it be what I call the more progressive folks? That's the political stuff. Realistically, though, their issues will be similar. And I wouldn't say they don't have, they do. A lot of remember, we're talking about a lot of people. And a lot of Democrats have very clear, positions on all these things. They've been very good about things. But you're right, I think, as kind of national spokesmen, they are not getting their word out as well. and partly for going on, but partly that's because of the national media, okay? And I'm not going to pull the Fox News thing because I don't consider the media. But the major media, 2, 5, and 7, I almost never see Democrats on the regular news. I might see on MSNBC. I'll see 4 or 5 minutes of Trump repeating himself 5 or 6 times, and the media thinks they're hurting Trump. They're only helping Trump. At the beginning, you see Trump saying something outrageous when they plug the news, what's coming up, and then they play it again, and then they get to the news story itself, and they play it again. And those never do you see Democrats responding to a lot of this stuff. It's not because they don't want to, it's just that you only have so much time in that entertainment we call news. And if you take it a lot up with showing Trump 3 or 4 times, it wasn't that way when Obama was president. When Obama was president, they'd give him like 10 seconds and they'd have 4 or 5 Republicans just destroying him if they could, okay? So remember, I'm just saying part of our challenge is the media too. But yes, the Democrats, I think it'll be there. It's just, it may be a little fuzzy at times because we don't all agree.
Yeah. Well, the next unifying message I see from the Democrats will be the first, so that'll be good. I think it's time to open it up for questions. I mean, we have David Orr here. He's really happy to answer questions. Anything you have for the sitting clerk while he's still sitting?
Or comments. I don't know that much.
I think I can talk loudly, but I wanted to ask what keeps you motivated all these years? I see you still have the passion that I remember from decades ago. I mean, you've seen so much, and how do you keep that energy going?
Was a question, what keeps me motivated?
Yeah.
Well, again, I've been lucky because I've had to fight a lot of uphill battles. You know, it was tough to win when your people get beat up and people get tickets parked legally in front of their house. You know, so I experienced all that, which is why I'm a little jaded. You know, I experienced all that. But the thing is, what keeps me going is that I see progress, and frankly, I've been treated so well by the public. You know, people say, oh, well, your press has always been good, and for the most part it has. I've been pretty lucky. There's been some pretty nasty stuff because they're press that are just like the machine. They don't really care. They're there basically to be a mouthpiece for certain powerful aldermen whose names I won't mention, like Ed Burke. And I won't even mention the obvious columnist I'm referring to. But basically, when you've got kind of the public on your side, and for me, the press on your side, to take on these battles, it's exciting. Everybody likes to make people feel good. In that sense, Ed Verdoliak and I are the same. If I can help you and he can help you, that's great. The difference is that he can help you by fixing your ticket, get your kid a job, all those kinds of things, which I think leads to corrupting the system. And I can help you if I can get you the information you need to challenge your taxes or whatever. So in that sense, and having good people around and good staff, I wasn't so sure I really wanted to run again after. I don't know if I would have run again if Harold Washington hadn't won in '83. And then '86 I had to run, okay. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to higher office as a independent, progressive alderman, whatever, because I didn't have the money, I wouldn't have the party. And I never would have been elected clerk to begin with in 1990 if I hadn't had that week as mayor. So a lot of politics, like life and jobs, or accidents, who you meet, how you meet. So there are times when I wanted out, I will definitely tell you that. You know, when you see things written that are blatantly untrue, that kind of stuff. But basically, I've been lucky to have good support from staff and the public. And actually, I'm really lucky because, you know, there's a lot of my colleagues, it's hard to walk around. You go to a ball game and, you know. But people are really nice to me.
I can actually vouch for that. You know, I'm a school board member. I don't go to the local Jewel anymore. Just saying. It's off my list of things to do.
Hey, you want to hear, well, I know you want to go, but you want to hear a really, it's a little off-color joke. It's not a joke. It's a reality of the inside politics of City Hall. Okay, so whether you want to hear it or not, Ed Verdoliak.
Your staff just jumped. I
Okay.
just want you to know that
That's
they just
all right.
jumped.
Okay, Ed Verdoliak was the charming rogue. He was a charming rogue. He could charm the socks off of anybody. But he was, you know, he was a leader of the opposition. He went to jail a couple times. He probably should have gone to jail a lot more. But a charming rogue. And he was a leader, okay? And city council was filled with people with no huevos or whatever. So it made him a stronger leader. Because, Eddie, what are we going to do? I'll tell you what to do. Shut up and listen. So he was that kind of leader. But during the council wars, and a lot of you are too young, but it was really a racial battle, okay? Harold wins, and all of a sudden, the city council divided by 29 white aldermen, mostly remnants of the powerful machine, and Harold's 21, most of the African-American members of that were part of the old machine, okay? Very conservative. But they had to go along with Harold because he was so popular. But 29, 21. So one of the fun things we did, we'd have softball games, okay, against the media or against, in this particular case, it was city aldermen versus state legislators in Wrigley Field before the Cubs play. And that particular game, Big Jim Thompson was pitching for them. Okay, so I was a fairly good ball player compared to some of those other aldermen. Okay, so Vrdolek wanted me to play. Otherwise, if I wasn't, he'd set me on the bench, whatever. So I want to tell you one other thing first, and that is that, do you know who Wilson Frost was? Yeah. Okay, Wilson Frost was an African-American alderman, very influential, and he was the president pro tem back when Old Man Daley died. When Old Man Daley died, people thought, well, Wilson Frost should be mayor, but of course, the 11th Ward is not going to let that happen. He was black, okay? So they picked Belandic, who was from the 11th Ward, who was obviously white. But that's when they brought in this vice mayor thing, by the way. There was no vice mayor in 1840 and 1940. This all came after Old Man Daley died. So the compromise was, okay, we weren't going to let you African Americans have that spot that you think you deserve, but we'll create a vice mayor post. So if something happens again to the mayor, we'll have a vice mayor that could take over. So anyway, that's who Wilson Frost was, okay? So we're in the huddle getting ready to play the game, and all these aldermen, he's powerful, goes, hey, Eddie, I want to play this. I want to just shut up. He says, all of you shut up, or you're not going to play at all. It was all kind of fun, but, you know, and so, I mean, it was fun. It just seems weird. So Eddie says, okay, shut up. Here's the deal. Only 2 blacks are playing, Frost and Orr, and the red, blah, 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 blah. Did you hear that? Only 2 blacks are playing, Frost and Orr. Anyway, the point was I was considered black because I supported their side. But that was Vrdoliak's sense of humor. But actually, it was interesting because if you're going to have all these racial battles, humor's better than what you got from some of the other folks. So anyway, you want me to tell that story?
Now, I know you all aren't shy. I've met most of you.
Since you started down memory lane, that's something that's going to bother me for the rest of the afternoon. You started out with Fred Rohde. Fred Rohde, remember, actually held court in a restaurant across the street from City Hall that's now 312, and he was in booth. Remember, the feds actually bugged that booth, and that was one of the reasons Rohde went down. Do you remember the name of that restaurant?
Which one? The one where all the aldermen went to jail from? The 312 is on the corner.
Right.
Okay, I thought you were referring to the one right across from City Hall.
Yeah, right. Straight across. When you walk
Straight
out the door.
across from
Petros?
Cafe, something cafe. That's where they had wires. That's why a lot of these aldermen went to jail.
Yeah, right. His
Isn't
table
that
was
Petros
bugged.
Cafe? Am I wrong?
Which one?
Petros Cafe?
No, not Petros is on the corner.
Petros on the corner?
Across from where 312. It's
I
not
just
there
tell you where
anymore.
I meet the aldermen.
Yeah, it's not there anymore, but it was there, and that's, if you came in there, the big table in the corner was Fred Rohde's table, Frody and DiArco, the other mobsters, and then, of course, Bernie Stone sat there every day, and that's where they kind of make fun of you, and you'd kind of walk in and try and find another table, but you knew you weren't welcome. It might come to me in any minute, but cafe, it's in a lot of the stories. Yeah, speak loud.
I speak
can't
loud
hear.
forever, yeah. Just a quick question. Do you see somewhere down the road the Electoral College being challenged? I mean, now we've had 2 presidential elections where the Electoral College dictated who the winner was. I mean, I realize that's in the Constitution, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a tough fight, but I hope so. There's a lot of groups working on it right now. But again, for the younger folks or whatever, when I say think big, and I'm serious about the Senate. I know, back in 1785 or whatever, it all made sense. Big states, small states, we had to do a compromise. But these are bad ways to have a republic, okay? And the Electoral College is part of that. It's just kind of the same thing. So it's an uphill battle, but I think in the same way that the right-wingers just a few years ago, they thought really big. Even the ones that were very conservative and financed by the Koch brothers and, keep your hands off my Medicare, keep your hands off my government, anyway. But I think if enough people keep talking about these things and reminding people about the ultimate unfairness, if I could advise Barack on something back in his term with the filibuster, that every time there was like 57 or 58 elected officials in favor of something and it would be defeated, I think that's good to remind people there's something wrong there, okay? And so I think if lots of people started talking about it, I don't know how we necessarily get there. It's a tough road. But I think we need to be raising things every day. And there are good people working on it, but these are tough. And the ideal would be is when it's really got to come from like someone like Trump or another Republican that gets elected this way, but they're willing to help change it. But really it's kind of like the Koch model. I hate to say it because I despise what they try and do, but they're very smart and they have tons of money and they work through the states, okay? And that's really important to know what they're really up to because this last election really made it difficult for them to achieve their dangerous goals. But what they do is to work through the states, and that's what you'd have to do. You work through the states, and you get enough folks to do that. But it's one of those things, it seems like a really long-term effort, like why don't we have senators in D.C.? I mean, these are all things that everybody should be talking about, particularly Democrats, because who knows? I mean, sometimes there's dynamic shifts for whatever reason we can't predict. So I think people should talk about those things. Not in a, I don't want to overdo it. I mean, when we mentioned Hillary before, Hillary knew the score when she started, okay? So that was the policy for that, so that's the way it was. It was Electoral College, okay? But in the long run, we need to change some of those things. But there are several groups, if you go online, that are working on it, but they're tough because entrenched power. But it'd be great to, just say who gets the most votes wins.
My question is, how do we sustain this high turnout? We had it this time, but how do we keep it going?
Boy, how do we sustain the high turnout?
Yeah.
If we do that, we're going to make our democracy work better, but extraordinarily difficult. I hope the answer to that isn't to have more Trumps. Okay, that's a sad thing, is that Trump had a lot to do with it, and frankly, remember, a normal turnout in a gubernatorial, and this is just of registered voters, at least in suburban Cook and similar in state of Illinois, is 49, 50, 51%. Okay, whereas a presidential will be 72, 73%. But that's just registered voters. That's not eligible. I would suggest that in the long run, the things that would encourage turnout the best is if we can do what I was talking about earlier, is actually govern better, okay? Increasingly, it's not just the battle, Democrat, Republicans, or Trump versus this, it's not achieving things, okay? Not achieving things that the voters can really appreciate. Sometimes the voters may be naive, but overall, do they see something successful? Okay, I don't just mean the old Democratic machine folks. They got it successful. They got their pensions, live in the suburbs, they dislike blacks, they're all happy as clams, and they Trump supporters, and they got all their money from Democrats and their pensions. I don't mean that. If we can govern better and we can keep the activism up, okay? Like right now, we got a surge. All those people are so excited that they elected these people. They're so excited, and they're going to be that way for a while. But if we can govern more fairly, then people see, oh, that's why it's important to vote, because, they're going to raise that minimum wage, or they're going to say, everybody, including the stuff we tried to pass in the suburbs, that, you have a right to earn sick time, okay? We passed that at the county level. You might know that we passed that, a county bill, okay? But then in the suburbs, many of the suburbs opted out. And again, they got different reasons, but I just think that's wrong, okay? And if, in fact, we bring that back and have that up publicly now, and we could make noise about it before the April elections in the suburbs, a lot of those suburbs wouldn't do it again. So it's a combination of governing well, and the activism will determine whether or not the turnout jumps. And of course, the Trump figure will be there. If Trump is on the ticket in 2020, that will help drive turnout for, quote, both sides. I don't know if he'll be on the ticket, though. So
We have time for one last question.
Thanks.
he might be on a Russian ticket. But
So one of the sort of interesting stories that came out of this election locally was the defeat of a judge on the ballot. And I guess I'm just wondering, that seems, I think for new voters, that's so overwhelming to see that long list of people, those judges that you have no clue who they are. And I'm just wondering if you feel like judges ought to be elected. Is that deterring people when they get into the ballot, looking at the ballot?
I'm sorry, is this about judges?
Yeah, should judges
Yeah,
be
judges.
elected?
The judge who was defeated was sort of astounding because most of the time they're just reelected.
Okay, I think we should do everything we can to make the ballot simpler. We got a lot of idiots in Springfield. Okay, number one, we've tried for years to get the retention judges off the ballot. And we have a plan, and it'd simply be called, we start with this merit retention. Now, you may know lots of groups that we respect were worried about merit selection of judges because they felt the old days, women, African Americans, minorities might have a hard time becoming judge. And in this climate, that's true. Although it's better. I think if you had merit retention, I mean, things have changed now. You're not going to say, oh, she's a woman, we're not going to let her in. Merit retention would simply mean of those like 69, usually it's 75 or 80, that the bar associates all get together, they do a rating. If you pass that rating, you don't have to run for re-election. You're automatically get another 6 years. But it's kind of like a review, okay? So, but if you don't pass that rating, then you got a choice. You could either quit or you can go on the ballot. And then we're talking about maybe 3, 4, 5. And if 3, 4, 5 in a place like Cook County are on the ballot, that's manageable. Then people will pay attention. Okay, a lot of people don't even look at that second sheet. And there's a lot of little things that could and should be changed that make the ballot more complicated, because remember, we got the 4 languages. So it'll say the vacancy of so-and-so Boyle. What the hell does that mean? None of us know that. I mean, maybe a few lawyers do. So why is that on there? Okay? Because remember, we're doing it in 4 languages, so it just takes all this space. Okay? And it's a great disincentive, okay? Partly because, remember, a lot of people, at least in the suburbs, like to vote on the touch screen. But the lines were too long because people were in the booths for 20, 25 minutes. And they can do a little faster on a paper. By the way, there will be new election equipment, which is good, because I was really ready to really go out and attack some Cook County big shots. They delayed our election equipment for nearly 2 years. And we lucked out this last time. Had a lot of breakdowns. Card activators, one of our pieces of equipment, wasn't working very well. A lot of problems. Now, we got through it just fine, except for that one precinct. There's a 1-vote difference. We'll see how that comes. We got fine, but this incredible delay in the county in purchasing really needs to be looked at. Incredible unnecessary delays. But anyway.
All right, well, thank you for your time today, and thank
Oh,
you
thank
for your
you.
long and distinguished career.
And I'm only going to correct one thing David Orr said. He said he mostly was in politics and elected office for 40 years because of luck. It's not true. He was in there because not only did he work harder than the opposition at retail politics, which is hard, and taking on the machine as he did it. But he did it with integrity, he did it with passion, and he did it with a vision to improve the conditions of the elected office he was going to hold on behalf of the people he represented. That's why he had a 40-year career. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Ralph.